This
started
conference
this
will
recording.
now be recorded.
Okay, so it's all about the whole context is when I say automation, the first thing that we need is we have to learn how to identify the elements, and the second important stuff is how to act on those elements. So these are the basic things that you have to make sure you are comfortable with whenever you are starting with any of the automation tools. So that's how we started the Selenium automation session in our last discussion. So today we will see how we are going to automate or how we are going to achieve these two things on the mobile platforms. Okay. And now when we need to start automating some apps on the mobile device, we need to know uh, what kind of apps we will have on mobile devices. So just someone can someone of you give a guess on what kind of apps you basically see on mobile devices? Could you figure out or generalize different kinds of apps on your mobile device?
Gmail, Drive, Calendar, Google Map.
Yep. So I'll basically generalize this as three categories. Okay. And let's name them later, but let's just understand what are the different kinds of apps that we would see. Let's take the example of calculator. Okay. If I take the calculator, how it looks like, it is restricted to that particular OS, right? So it's a default app that comes into the mobile device and it is restricted for that OS. It doesn't actually work on another OS. I mean to say, when the calculator app, which is developed for Android, will not work for iOS, and the same kind of app, a calculator app, which is designed for iOS, will not work for Android, right? So anything that is restricted only to that particular type of mobile is one kind of app. Okay. And the other kind of thing is we will have this Chrome browser where we could go ahead and search different websites on the Chrome, right? And also we will have different browser apps where we can just go ahead and search for different stuff on the internet. So the browsers are something like different, and there would be some apps where we can traverse from the link to the browser. If you take the example of Android, I mean WhatsApp, it has both the versions. It has version which is restricted and we could use particularly on a particular mobile device, and we also have an browser version of WhatsApp. So we have those kinds of apps as well, which works both on mobile OS and also on the browser. Okay. Now, if I have to name them, let me put them in different, I mean, in the naming convention now. So we were talking about three different kinds of apps that we do have. The first one is, I name it as native. Native, the name itself is saying like this is something which is native to the mobile, or or different kinds of mobiles, I could say. Only mobile, called as native apps, and the best example for this is calculator app, or any kind of app that specifically works or designed for the mobile devices. Okay, that those kinds of apps are called as native apps. And we the second type of app is mobile web apps. So these are to access internet. uh, these could be used, and the examples could be Chrome, Firefox, or whatever they are. And we also have the third type of app category, which is like hybrid. Okay. Hybrid in the sense, where we have both web as well as mobile versions. Okay. So these are different mobile apps that are available in mobile devices. Okay, so we will see how we can actually find out the elements inside these apps, but just to give an gist of this, so these are different kinds of mobile apps that are available in our mobile devices. So when I say native, it is strictly restricted for that mobile. When I say web apps, those are like apps which are used to access the internet, such as like Chrome, Firefox, and all. When I say hybrid, these will have access. I mean, using this, we could access both web as well as mobile. I mean, they have interlinkages or accessible through native or mobile web apps. I mean, they have both the versions, you could also say, or they will have the native will have redirection to the web browser, somewhere like that. Is this clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so now let's and we have many open source tools that are available in the market to automate mobile mobile applications. So the most popular and the tool that we are gonna learn throughout these lectures is APM. Okay, there are so many other tools like Selendroid is one such tool. Robotium is one other tool. Selendroid, Robotium, okay, and many other tools are also available in the market to actually automate mobile applications or mobile apps. But why APM? The futures of APM is it's an open source tool. It is the only tool which supports cross platform testing. When I say cross platform, the scripts that we develop for Android could be used for running the same on iOS as well. That is what I mean by cross platform. APM features are it's an open source tool. It's an open source tool and it's a cross platform supporting tool. Okay. And this works for native apps, hybrid apps, as well as mobile web apps. Okay. So these are the features that the APM has. APM is an open source tool. It's a cross-platform supporting tool. So when I say cross-platform, I'm just repeating it. The scripts that we develop for Android could be used for iOS as well, with little modifications that which are basically driver initializations. We will come to know about this shortly. And this also works for native, hybrid, as well as mobile web apps. Whereas Robotium and Selendroid works strictly for Android. They cannot be used for iOS. Okay, so Selendroid and Robotium are strictly for Android, whereas APM is a cross-platform supporting tool and it's an open source tool and supports for native, hybrid, and mobile web apps. So that's the reason APM has so many advantages when compared to other tools that are available in the market for mobile automation. Okay. And now if you talk about the languages that APM supports, they are it supports 5 languages, same like Selenium, which are like Selenium, C Sharp, Ruby, Python, and JavaScript. So these are the languages that APM supports. So user can pick any language and could automate uh, the mobile apps. So for this particular course, we will go with Java, which every one of us are familiar with. Okay. So now when someone asks you to give some points on APM, you could mention all these things. APM is an open source tool. It's a cross-platform supporting tool, and this works for native, hybrid, and mobile apps. And you know what is native app, what is hybrid app, and you also know what is mobile web app. And the languages that it supports is Java, C Sharp, Ruby, Python, and JavaScript. Okay, so this is all about an introduction to APM. And one important point that you have to understand is APM internally uses WebDriver. Okay, can everyone go on mute, please? Okay, so what I'm saying is APM internally uses WebDriver JSON wire protocol, which Selenium also uses. Okay, so you could say APM is on top of Selenium, which is used for uh, mobile devices or automating mobile apps. Okay, so APM is an additional layer on Selenium, you could say, on top of Selenium. If you remember the architecture of Selenium that we discussed, we have JSON wire protocol as the mediator, which establishes the communication between the browser driver and the client libraries, right? Here also, the JSON wire protocol will establish that communication between different kinds of parameters that we will understand when we discuss APM architecture. Okay, so these are the things that you have to understand or describe when you are asked about APM, and why your choice is APM for mobile app automation when compared to many other open source tools that are available in the market. Okay, so these are the points. A quick introduction to APM. Now let's deep dive into APM using Java. Okay, so the major part, and I was also saying to you like APM is on top of Selenium. Okay, so when you are familiar with Selenium, APM would be easy for you except the setup. Okay, so setup is an important stuff that one has to be familiarize himself with in APM automation, in APM mobile automation. So once you are successful in achieving the setup, everything would look similar to Selenium, but a little changes here and there is something that uh, that is easy to grab, and it is not like very tough part. The toughest part when coming to APM is establishing the connections and doing the setup is something which is important. And let's see what are the installations that are required for doing this mobile automation. Okay, so I would bring up this in a different manner for simplicity. So let's discuss different stuffs that are needed. Okay, so when I say mobile automation, okay, when I say mobile automation, what is mobile automation is we are trying to interact with different devices. Okay, we are trying to interact with different devices. In this case, we are talking about Android and iOS. Okay, so we do have an Android mobile and an iOS mobile. Okay, so this is what we are talking about. This is Android mobile and this is iOS. So we are trying to automate the apps which are inside this particular devices. It could be any kind of app, and we should be able to automate that particular app. Okay, so that is the end target for us. So we should be able to achieve that. We should be able to automate the app inside these devices. Okay, how do we do that? So now we need to send a script, right? So that this particular device will behave according to the script that we are going to develop. Okay, so now we have to write some script, and then we have to make sure the script that we are writing is something which the Android or iOS device is behaving. Based on the script that we are writing here, these devices has to basically behave according to our script that we have developed over here. Okay. And now there is a mediator over here. It's, if you remember Selenium RC, I told you there is some server in between which is like a mediator in picking up the calls from the client libraries and giving them to the browser. You remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. Similarly, here also we do have a mediator. I'll name all of these shortly, but you just understand the concept how this basically works. So this server is sitting on a particular port. Okay. This server listens on a particular port. uh, the port number is 4723. Okay, it could be anything. You could set up on any port, that's your wish, but right now I'm giving a default port number which is 4723, and this particular server is on your local host. Okay, 0000. So this is something which is on your local host, or it is up to you on which IP you would like to configure this server and on what port they are configurable, and you will see them shortly how to actually configure them or how to give different ports and IP addresses. But for now, let me tell you, like, this is something which is on IP address 0000, port numbers 4723. And now this is like an mediator to establish a communication between this end to the this end. I'll call this as a source. Let me call this as source and this as destination. I'll call this as source and this is the destination. Okay. So now it is your responsibility to make sure you're redirecting your calls, okay, or your code to this particular port. Okay. So, the mediator who is actually communicating between the source and the destination is listening on port number 4723. And now it is your responsibility to redirect all your calls onto this particular port. Okay. So instead of this particular port, if you are redirecting your calls to a different port, okay, if you are redirecting to a different port, there is nothing over there to listen to your request so that it could respond back. Okay, so this is an invalid redirection. So it is always important in Appium automation to redirect your calls to the specific port on this particular server is listening. Then only this server could get your request and send back the response to you. Okay, so that's an important point over here. So the important point over here is you have to redirect your calls to the Appium server port and the IP address so that this server will understand your request. Okay, and it performs that request or action on the devices. Okay, so it took the request and it sends the request to different mobile devices. Okay, and now these mobile devices will actually perform that action. So let's say the action could be something like this: I want to click on a particular button on a particular app. Okay, or else on a calculator app, I just need to press plus button is my action. So for clicking on this button, I identify the element of it and I'm performing click on it. So these are my lines of code. So I gave these requests. The first request, which is both the lines, like driver dot find element this button dot click. So that is my request. I gave my request or redirected my request to this server, and server communicated the same to the device. Okay, and now the device performs that action on that calculator app, and then it gives the response back to the server. Okay, and now server transfers that response back to the source. Okay, now it is the turn of source to analyze the response and assert that response. Okay, so this is how the communication basically happens. The whole communication happens in Appium. Okay, now if you name different parts over here, and I am saying this as server, right? I call this as Appium server. So we this is called as Appium server, which actually sits on a particular port and listens to the requests from client code. We are clients, we are putting the request to the devices, right? So we call this as Appium client libraries. Even in Selenium you have seen this. So this is called as Appium client code. So the client code should be redirected to the Appium server, so that Appium server will send that request back to the devices, so that the action will be performed on the devices. Okay, but in between the server and the devices we have a framework. Okay, we have a framework which is given and developed by the Android developers only. So Android developers provided us a framework which helps us to interact with the apps on which are installed on this Android OS. Okay, so we need to use this framework to interact with the Android apps which are installed on Android OS. Okay, so we basically use these frameworks, or Appium uses these frameworks to interact with the apps on this OS. Okay, so for Android, the name of this framework is UI Automator 2. Okay, let me name it as, so the name of this framework is UI Automator 2. Okay, so this is the name of that particular framework for Android. Okay, so this framework is UI Automator 2. Similarly, for iOS also we do have a different framework, and that framework name is XCUI test. Okay, so the framework that is used for iOS is XCUI test. Okay, just remember the names, this is very important. So XCUI test. All right, and this is an outline of the architecture. But before that, one thing you have to notice over here is, so we could have n number of devices, right? So I could have two Android devices and two iOS devices, and whatnot. We can have n number of devices. So you're putting some request, you're saying click a button on a calculator app, and now you have four devices. Okay, how do this Appium server understands to which device it has to communicate with? So it should know whether it is an Android device or iOS device, and if it is an Android device, what device it is. Out of these two devices, what device it has to interact with or perform this action on is something that this Appium server has to understand, right? So how do this Appium server understands? So you need to give that info to this Appium server. Appium server is just a listener and responser, that's all. It doesn't actually process anything. So it just acts to the request that you're placing. That's all what Appium server will basically do. That's an important note over here. So whatever you're saying to this Appium server, it actually performs that and gets that response, gives it back to you. That's all. So when you're not giving the right details, this will throw you an error saying like, I'm not able to uh, perform your request, or get the response for your request is what something it gives. it gives it back to you. So it is always important for this Appium client code to give all the required details that the Appium server should use to perform that particular request, or and to get the response. So that's an important note. So now, on that note, it is the responsibility of the source code to mention whether it is Android device or iOS device, and a unique identifier to identify that device as well. Okay, so out of these two devices, let's say I'm saying the platform that this Appium server has to interact is Android. Now out of these four devices, two got sorted out. Okay, now we are left with only two devices. So when we pass the platform name, when we are giving the platform name as Android, or when we are saying platform name as Android to Appium server, it means like it tries to fetch only the devices which where the platform installed is Android. It ignores iOS devices. And now out of these two devices, we should say, like, out of these two devices, on which device it has to perform that action. Okay, so every device in this world will have an unique ID. We call this as UDID, universal ID. And we can also have device names. Okay, we can also have device name. Okay, let's say the device name of this is A, device name of this is B. When I pass the platform as Android and the device name is B, then this Appium server understands I need to interact with an Android device whose device name is B. Okay, in that way it basically figures out with what device it has to communicate, and then what device it has to perform the action. So it is as simple as that. You give the details, it takes the details, communicates that to Android device, gets that response, gives it back to you. It's like a translator between two important, between the source and destinations, whose language is not known to each other. Okay, it's as simple as that. Is this clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello. Okay,
Yes.
this is the whole heart for the entire Appium, and everything runs on this. I hope it's clear for everyone. Or if anyone wants me to repeat, you could come up and say it right away.
Uh,
Any questions?
Yeah.
uh,
So, hello.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah. So my question is, whenever we are testing mobile, so we always know how many device we are going to test, and the like a UID number and the device name. So we cannot go with like a any random device. Just in case I know that okay, this device is Android device, and I just
Mhm.
send that because this is not possible. I have to know the ID number and device name also.
Yes, absolutely. You need to
Okay.
know the details on which you have to perform the action on.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? So we call these details like platform name, device name, we call these as capabilities or desired capabilities. Desired capabilities are nothing but it's like mentioning to the Appium server like these are the capabilities that you have to use to interact with the devices. Okay, we call this as desired capabilities. Okay, these are desired capabilities. So we now came up different naming things right now. One is Appium client code, and other one is UI automator. Two, XEUI test. These are like frameworks provided to interact with the mobile devices. And you're aware of the devices, the most probably Android and iOS. And you also heard about Appium server and also desired capabilities. And now look for the installations. Okay, now you have a better understanding of the architecture now. And now you have to understand what installations that you have to perform, and what are all the tools that are required to actually perform these things. Okay, or to establish this particular setup. All right, so now let's understand the tools that are required to actually achieve this setup. And now it's to keep it short, we have something like this. We have client code, we have server, we have devices. Okay, so this is all about Appium. For this particular thing, I was saying you this is Appium server. Okay, so this server could be installed in two ways. You could get a desktop app from a website named as appium.io. Okay, so you can use appium.io to actually get a desktop version of this particular server, so that you could start the server, or else, or also you could install this as node.js version. Okay, you can install this and run it as a node.js package. Okay, so this is the installation number one. The installation number one is you have to get the Appium installed in your machine. Okay, and the second thing and most important thing is, okay, let me show you the websites as well in parallelly, so that you'll get an idea. So when I say Appium, there is a website called as appium.io. Okay, so here you could just click on download, so that the relevant file will executable file will get downloaded, and you just need to go ahead and install that. Okay, so just to give a glimpse of it, you
Should
could
we do
see.
parallelly?
No, I don't think so, because it takes a lot of time, because we have, I mean, it takes a lot of time. You could give give a try after this session, and if there are any queries, we could get them resolved tomorrow.
And
All right,
when we'll get this recording so that it's easy to.
maybe right after the session you'll be getting this.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So here you could see, once you go to that appium.io website, there is a link to download this particular tool. So once you click on it, it redirects to a GitHub page where you will see the executable files for different versions. You have for Mac over here, you have for Windows, you have for Linux. So mine is in Windows version, so I'll just go ahead and download this, so that I could just double click. Once this got downloaded, I just need to double click this and get this installed. So once the installation is successful, you would see an app on your desktop looking something like this: Appium server GUI. As I was saying you, Appium comes in two different flavors. One is an GUI app, other one is Node.js, uh, Node.js package version. So definitely we will explore Node.js package version at later point of time in these particular sessions. But for some time we will go ahead and just use this Appium server GUI. Okay. So if I open this Appium server GUI, just try to sync what we have discussed with the architecture to what we are talking right now, because everything makes sense only if you are able to visualize both at one go. So once you launch this Appium server, it looks something like this. Not sure what's wrong. Okay, so this is how it looks basically. Okay, so I was saying you right. So we have a particular host on which you can make sure this Appium server sits on and on a particular port. You could even change them, or you could go ahead and use the defaults. But as we don't have any server missions on which we could start the Appium server, so it's always like we will run on 0000, which means it's a local host, and on a default port number which Appium uses is 4723. And you could use this or you could change this, it's up to you, but I'll go with the default. And if I click on start server, it starts the Appium server, and you could see welcome to Appium. We and it's the version of the right Appium that I have installed. And Appium REST HTTP listener started on 0000, which means the local host, and the port number is 4723. Okay, so now we configured the server, and the server is ready for us. Okay.
Excuse me, sir. I have a question about this port number. So,
Mhm.
if we will use this default one, that will be fine for every time, or we can
Yes,
change it?
that should be fine. You could even change that. The only conflict that you'll get is when you're running something on this particular port number, you could not reuse that port for Appium. You got it? So let's suppose I'm running a particular application on port number 4723. So you couldn't use the same port for this Appium server, right? So in
So
that
every time
case,
we need to change it?
no, you doesn't actually need to change it. Not every time you will change this. 4723
Mm-hmm.
is a default port you could use every time.
Okay.
When you need to change it is on 4723, if there is some other application which is running, and if you couldn't use that port anymore, then you have to go ahead and start using different port or configure this Appium server on a different port. You're getting me?
No, I am not getting it. Can you please repeat it again?
uh, so we have this port concept. Let's suppose port is something on which we could make a particular server running on it. Okay, let's suppose I have two ports, 4723 and 8080. Okay, so I have two ports, let's say 4723 and 8080. Okay, on this port number 4723, I got my React app running on this particular port. Okay, I started my app on my React app running on this 4723. So when I say localhost 4723, it opens my React application. Okay, now on the same port, if you try to actually start your Appium server too, it throws you an error saying like this port is occupied. Why this port is occupied? This port is occupied because another app, which is a React app, is running on this particular port. In that case, you cannot allocate the same port to Appium server. Got it?
Okay.
So
Got it,
this
got it.
port cannot be used anymore because it is occupied by some other application.
Okay.
So in that case, you also have 8080. You could go
Mhm.
ahead and use this port for Appium server. Got it?
So,
And once
what does it 8080? It's also a default port number?
no, it's not a default port number. It is something that you're giving. It could be 5000, it could be 4000, it could be
Okay.
4999, it could be
Okay.
anything. But the only thing that you need to make sure is once this Appium server is started on a particular port, you need to redirect your client calls, Appium client calls, to that particular port. Okay, so
Okay.
that is important. Then only
Mhm.
you are keeping your client code and the Appium server in sync so that they will be able to communicate with each other. Okay,
Okay. Okay.
that's how it is.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
if you're talking to some person, and if you're not directing your face towards him, and if you're
Mhm.
directing your face towards opposite to him, it doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean like you're talking with that person, right? You're communicating with some other thing which is not there. It's
Okay.
as simple as that.
Mhm.
Okay,
Thank you.
so that is about Appium server. Now we got our Appium server started on 0000, and you could also see it is listening on this particular port on the local host, which is 0000. Okay, now we are done with this particular part. We got the installation setup ready for this Appium server, and now the setup for this is over. Okay, and now what is needed to configure these devices. Okay, so when I say mobile device, I have two things. One is real device. Okay, real device. So why do we do this mobile testing? What is the actual purpose of doing this mobile testing? Could someone guess why do we do testing for the mobile apps?
Checking functionalities.
Great. And also any other reasons that you could figure out?
That actually app work proper in the mobile device, whatever we are testing.
Great. And also, so the main reasons are we need to make sure the app functionality is working as expected, right? So that is one important thing. Okay, when you come to when we talk about web browsers, web browser is not something which is constant. Like if you talk about Chrome is constant everywhere, whether it is iOS device, whether it is mobile device or whatever it is constant, right? So it's a single app. When it comes to any other kind of apps, mobile apps, so what it makes is not all mobile devices would be same, would be of the same device, wouldn't come with the same software, right? So we have different companies that are available in the market which are actually providing us the mobile devices. Okay, if you come to Android, it is Samsung. If we have uh, Oppo, we have Realme, we have OnePlus, we have different brands who are actually manufacturing the mobile devices, and they're all using Android, but some modified version of Android. Not all mobile manufacturers are using the same OS, but they are using a modified version by adding some additional software of their own to those mobile devices, right? So we need to make sure our app is running on all these kinds of devices, right? That is also an important story that we have to test and go through. So one important step functionality that we do mobile automation is we need to make sure the app is not crashing or app's functionality is not working, and also we need to check the compatibility of this app on different mobile devices. When I say different mobile devices, the devices that are coming up from different manufacturers and different models. You got it? Is that needed or not?
Yes.
That is needed, right? So the important stuff over here is how many real devices that we could go ahead and use for the testing. Let's say I have an app which is developed and I want to test the app on different mobile devices, and on how many real devices I could go ahead and test this. Is it possible to go ahead and configure 100 devices?
No.
No.
It's not possible, right? So it's also involves a lot of cost factor over here. Purchasing 100 mobile devices just for testing is not a good solution, right? So let's take this example. I have four manufacturers of different popularities. Okay, and mobile A is used by 1,000 users. Okay, and mobile B is being used by let's say 100, and mobile C being used is used by some, let's say 5 and 10. Okay, I call this as 5 users and 2 users. In this case, if we, it makes sense if we actually use this as a real device, right? Instead of these three devices, it really makes sense if we use this device for real mobile testing. Okay, but do you ignore testing on these devices?
No.
No, right? We shouldn't ignore testing on these devices. For that purpose, there comes the savior, which is called as emulator. Okay, I call this as emulator. Emulator is nothing but it's a virtual device with the same software, but it is not a real device. Okay, it's a virtual mobile device. This is, when I say real device, this is the real mobile device that that you use day to day. Emulator is an virtual mobile device. Okay, now how to actually configure this emulator? Real device is, again, you need to procure one, and you need to do some settings, and you just need to run or install the app on it, and you have to run it. That's all you have to do on real device. You use this real devices day to day, and you also know how to install it and all, but configuring it for running our automation scripts is what we will see at later point of time. We doesn't need to understand anything on configuration part or procuring part. Procuring part is just, you just go to a shop, get the mobile device that you want to actually use for your automation testing, and get that. So that's how you get your real device. Nothing much. When it comes to emulator, which is a virtual device, you need to have some softwares installed so that you could actually configure this emulator. Now we are going to talk about the softwares that are needed, that you know I mean to say, the softwares that need to be installed to configure this emulator. Now I want to create a virtual mobile device on this particular computer. So when I say virtual mobile device, it uses the hardware that is there, that is from my core system, or my PC. It uses the hardware from my PC, and it runs on that particular hardware, and the software comes up with different versions, and you could also choose the wanted software that you want to install on that particular Android device. And how to do all this stuff is something that you're going to see it shortly. Okay, now we understood installing this apm.io, and we understood the difference between real device and emulator device. And now we have to go ahead and see what softwares do we need to configure this emulator right now. So the software that we need to get this emulator on our system is, the first thing that we need is Android Studio. Okay, so we need Android Studio. Using this Android Studio, we could go ahead and create our different emulators of different Android versions and different screen sizes and all the things. Okay, so the first thing that we have to do is we need to go ahead and get Android Studio installed in your machine, or in your PC. Okay, so what I'm saying, we need Android Studio right now. I hope you remember all these things, and this is very important. So we need Android Studio right now. So to get this Android Studio installed on your machine, there is a website for getting Android Studio from. So just type Android Studio, developers.androidstudio.com. So if you go here to this particular website, here is the download button for you. You could just go ahead, click on this download, so that the relevant version will get downloaded for you. Okay, just go ahead, accept this and click on download, so that you will get a download started, which is of 943 MB, which I don't want to actually do it now. I already got everything installed in my machine and configured. Okay, now once that is installed, you have to run that executable file, and then you have to look something like this. Let me show you something. Okay, so just double click this. Once it gets downloaded, you just need to double click this particular executable file, and just need to go ahead and kickstart everything. Okay, so once it gets started, I already have this installed. You just need to go ahead and click on next, 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 and just install it. Okay, it's just a default install that I already got my things installed, so I don't want to proceed further. So it's just clicking on the next and finish the installation. You doesn't need to bother about anything. It's just like Appium stuff. Okay, so right now I'm just closing everything. I don't want to proceed further. So once this Android Studio installation is done, the thing that you have to understand here is configuring the device, okay, which is very important as part of Android Studio. So now I got my Android Studio installed. I'll open that Android Studio. Just click on this open. So uh, this is, I already have done the setup, so you don't see anything. But once the installation is finished, you're gonna click next multiple times and you'll be clicking on install, so that Android Studio will be installed. So for the first time, when you're gonna open this particular Android Studio, it asks for the project that you want to create. Okay, so that particular screen looks something like this. Okay, so for the first time when you're opening Android Studio, you will see this option, and just click on no activity and click on next, so that you will be landed on this particular screen, which is the Android homepage. And also make sure there will be some progress bars appearing at the bottom of the screen over here. Okay, at the bottom of this Android Studio you would see some progress bars, and you need to make sure you don't see any progress bars happening over here. Okay, so once everything is done, you will see no progress bars here. And also the next step is you just need to go to the tools. Okay, go to the tools here and go to the SDK manager. Okay, SDK manager is something where, and this gives you the path where our SDK, Android SDK, software development kit, is basically placed. Okay, so if you go to this particular location in your particular system, you will see SDK folder appearing over there. Okay, so if I go to this particular location, you would see all the required files got downloaded into this particular folder. So trust me, once the emulator is created, okay, once the emulator is created, you are no more gonna use this Android Studio anymore. Like, you no more use Android Studio, but when the device got struck or something, you could just come back here and we will do some reboot stuff. Okay, you will less frequently use this Android Studio, but everything would be done from this particular folder from later point of time, once the initial creation of this device and all is done. You got me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
so the
So,
most important stuff is you need to understand where is the Android SDK location. If you're not able to figure out one or remember one, you just need to come to this tools, click on this SDK manager, and here is where you will see the SDK path. Okay, this is the path we will use to do the setup. You all know, for installing Java, you will set some environment variables. Similarly, for using this Android SDK as well, you have to configure some environment variables, which we will see them shortly. But the first important thing is you have to know how to find out SDK location if you're actually not aware of. But in any system, it actually gets stored in the same path. Only the user gets changes if it is a Windows machine. So yeah, so if it's a Mac, you could just come over here and get your complete path of that SDK. Okay, so that's one important thing that you have to understand from here. And if you want a different version of the Android installed, again you could get the different versions of the Android coming over here, SDK platform versions like Jelly Bean, Lollipop, KitKat, where these are all different versions, Honeycomb. These are all different versions of the Android mobile devices or Android softwares that are available right now to us. Okay, with this you're no more gonna use this Android SDK folder as well. The most important thing in this Android Studio for us is this device manager. This device manager is the place where you will create different new devices, and uh, you could do rebooting, cold boot, and all the stuffs in this particular folder. All right, now let me explain you how to create a new device using this device manager. Okay, I'll just delete the existing device which is already there, so that you could get a fresh look of how to create a new device from this device manager. All right, so now I'm clicking on create device and choose the phone that you want to actually use and the size of the phone that you actually want to use. Okay, I'll go with uh, Pixel 6.7 and I'll click on next. And these are different release names that are available for the system image that you want to use or the Android version that you want to use. Here is the target version, Android 11.2, 12.2, and the relevant names of them. Okay, R, Q, Pi, Oreo, Marshmallow, and all these things. Okay, so now we got this. I want to actually get this software R installed in my mobile device. I'll choose that. Initially, when you're creating or using this for the first time, you don't see this downloaded, and you will see the same kind of download option available beside this R button. So you will just go ahead and click the download button so that this particular software will get downloaded for you. Okay, that's all what you have to do in this particular screen, which is system image screen. And once it is done, you just need to, and here there is a chance like maybe interviewers may ask you what kind of softwares that you have worked on of Android devices. You could name few of the available softwares or system images over here. So then you could go ahead and click on next button, and here you could name your device. Okay, AVD in the sense Android Virtual Device. Okay, so that's the full form of that AVD. And this is Pixel 6 Pro of size 6.7 inches, and the software that you're actually trying to install is R. Okay, so now I'm giving this as Apex classes. That's my AVD name. It's up to you what AVD name that you're gonna use for your AVD device. And once that is done, just click on finish. Now you could see a device got created for you, and there is a play button available right away in the same row. You just need to click on that particular run button so that you would see a screen is getting loaded. So you will see your mobile device loaded over here in short time. Okay, so now you got your device getting loaded, and this is how you will see your new device configured. So this is your brand new mobile virtual device, uh, which you could use running your devices. I mean, running your test cases. So this is one such version of software of a particular screen size, and you could configure any number of such devices using this Android Studio. Okay, now you got your uh, you know device configured and ready for you to use this for testing. And you could just go ahead and do some play around for this. Just scroll up, open uh, you could open a calendar, and could come back. You could open a clock, you could come back, and this works exactly as a mobile device, but the only thing is this will doesn't, I mean this doesn't will have like uh, voice calling, something like that. Even you could install games, play games, and do everything inside this mobile device, because it's an virtual device which will have the same capabilities like an original device. Okay, so everything could be done like a normal device. All right,
How
now
we
you
know?
are done. Uh-huh.
Sorry, how we know that this emulator device name and the UID number to use for the when we use to send a request?
Yeah, and you will got to know them shortly.
Okay,
We are just concentrating on just configuring this device now.
okay.
Okay, shortly you will run few commands to see the name of these devices or name of all the devices that are actually configured or created on your machine and all these things. Okay, is this part clear for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, so the next important thing is I created my device over here, and uh, the next thing I want to tell you is uh, device manager. So here you have few options. Okay, which is the important one is cold boot. Okay, this cold boot is basically used whenever you are using this emulator device and this is not responding, or or you are not able to control this mobile device anymore. So if you want to bring it back to the same state, as same state of like, or else like you, if you just want to force boot this, you just need to come to this device manager, expand these options, and just click on cold boot now, so that this mobile device will get cold booted or gets rebooted. Okay, so this is one option that you would use whenever it is needed. And you just to get give you some information, I just mentioned you could also delete these devices that you have created anytime by using this particular option, which is delete. Okay, so this is all about the options that we are gonna use in this Android Studio. Most probably, just to rewind, we have two important options. One is device manager and the other one is SDK manager, and these two are very important for us to one. The SDK manager gives us the path of the SDK, Android SDK, and the device manager gives us the path of, you know or allows us to create new devices of different screen sizes, of different software versions, and with different names. And we also will have options to cold boot or create a duplicate device with the same configuration. You could just click on duplicate and you could configure a new device on your machine, on this particular Android Studio or on your system. So this is all about Android Studio. I'm closing this now. We are good with that part. So now we understood two things. What are those? Configuring or creating an emulator device. Okay, now to actually use few options or few important things, or to run few commands on the SDK. So we know the path of the SDK is C users app, I mean username, app data, local Android SDK. Sometimes this app data will be hidden. You need to unhide that particular folder, and then you have to go ahead and go to the SDK folder. I mean, once you unhide that particular folder, which will be hidden, you could traverse through this path and you could see the SDK available over here. Okay, and the next important thing that you have to understand is to use command line arguments using on this SDK executables. You have to configure few environment variables. So the environment variables that you need to set here are: one is to the path environment variable. Hope I hope every one of you is aware of path system environment variable. To the path environment variable, you have to add two things. One is tools bin folder, because you have few executables available over here. So remember this, which is very important. STK tools bin is something which you will set in environment variables, path environment variable. You will append this particular path. Okay. And also along with this, you also have few executables over here, Windows batch executable files. So you also have to set uh, tools tools bin, and also we have the platform tools as well. Okay, so these are the three things that you have to actually append to your system environment variables. I'll show them shortly to you as well, but just to give a gist. So there are three things that you're going to add to your path environment variable. One is STK tools, and the other one is STK tools bin, and the third one is STK platform tools. Okay, and we also need to create a new environment variable with name Android underscore home. Okay, so we need to create an environment variable named as Android underscore home, and to that particular environment variable, the path that you have to set is the home path of this SDK. Okay, the home path of this SDK is nothing but, again, it's C users Mohan app data local Android SDK. This is something that you could find out from Android Studio as well. Okay, so these are the two things that you have to set in your environment variables. So just you could open your system environment variables. So go to environment variables and you could see I already have configured this. Android underscore home is where is a new environment variable that you have to create, and the path to it would be the home folder of that SDK. So just click on new, give the name as Android underscore home, and path would be the SDK path, and just click on OK, so that this will get appended or added to the system environment variables. And to the path environment variable, if I click on edit, you would see SDK platform tools, SDK tools pin, and it is also a good idea to add SDK tools as well. Okay, so if you add, you need to add those three things to your system environment variables and just click on OK. So I hope everyone know how to actually add a new one. Just click on new, copy paste the path. Click on new, copy paste the path. You have to do for all the three different paths inside that SDK folder. Okay. So this is one thing that you have to do in the system environment variables. Okay. What all we have done? We have set the path environment variables, and also we also have set the Android home, or created a new folder named as Android underscore home. Is that clear?
Sir, not that much, but once I will repeat your recording, then will get to know
Yeah,
easily.
that's you it's all like in a setup. Okay.
Yeah, setup it's a little tough for me, but once I will see your recording again and again, then I will do that.
Yep. You would find your, I mean, we could get them resolved if you got stuck somewhere, but just try
Yeah.
to understand the flow for now.
Okay.
That should be fine. I mean, at least you're getting an idea on what are the stuffs that we are doing, right? That's my
Yes.
intention in asking
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
And the next step would be,
Uh,
we are done with
Sorry.
we opened this emulator from the Android Studio. Now let's see how could we actually run or open this emulator from the Android SDK folder by running the command line command. Okay, for that what you have to do is you would be able to run these commands only after configuring the system environments. If you haven't configured the system environments correctly, you would not be able to run the command line commands to perform different actions on the SDK. Okay, So that's an important note. Now, instead of using the Android Studio, I would like to open or launch the emulator from the SDK folder using command line commands. Okay. For that, what I could do is click on emulator, double click on the emulator, go to the folder emulator and open your command prompt over here. I mean to say, you could launch your command prompt and redirect to the path of SDK forward slash emulator. Once you are in this particular folder, there are two commands that you have to understand. One command is to get the list of all AVDs that are being created on your particular device. On your device, you could have created a number of emulator devices, and it is tough for anyone to remember the names of emulator devices. And we all know that. So to get a list of all the AVDs that are created on your device, there is a command for that, which is emulator hyphen list hyphen AVDs. Okay. So this particular command will gives you the list of emulators that are created on your device. Okay. I created one device with name Apex classes, and that name is being populated over here once we ran this command, which is emulator hyphen list hyphen avds. Okay. Now if I want to launch this particular device, the command is emulator, sorry, emulator hyphen abd apex classes. So if I run this particular command, it starts our real device. Now it, you see, this is coming on a separate window, and you could do all the actions that you want to perform on this particular device. It got isolated from the Android Studio folder structure, and you could see it outside. This is how you will get the list of AVDs, the names of the AVDs that are created on your device, and the command to actually launch the device with a particular name. What does AVD stands for?
Android
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 virtual
virtual
device.
device.
Yes, Android virtual device. That's what we have seen while we created the emulator, right? So this is pretty much about configuring the device and launching an emulator. Okay. And now, are we good with this?
Yes, sir.
Right. So now we are done with two parts. One is we configured this Appium server, and we are also done with device. Now we are left with the client side parts that needs to be done. Okay. So as I told you, Android Appium is a layer on top of Selenium, right? So when I say a layer on top of Selenium, we actually go ahead and use Selenium libraries as well in this setup. So these are nothing but the client libraries that we add, the jar files that we add, or the dependencies that we add to our project. Those that part is this. We will get an IDE. So okay. So now we are done with this. We are done with this. And this is of two types: real and uh, emulator. And this is for iOS. We use Xcode for creating simulators of different iOS devices, and we also have real devices. On some day we would see creating simulators as well. It is pretty much easy. uh,
So, sorry, sir, to interrupt, but for iOS device, we use simulator and
yes, yes,
Android emulator, right?
Android is emulator, and for iOS we call this a simulator.
Simulator. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we will come back to this iOS later part of time. The reason being, Appium, as I told you, is a cross-platform tool. Whatever code that we actually develop for the Android should actually work for iOS as well. Should not, it's not, it will work for iOS as well. But initial connection, we need to mention this is iOS device. of this name of this UDID is what we have to mention. So those parameters, the connection parameters, is the only thing that gets changed. Okay, so don't worry much, we will actually figure that out as well. So now we
Uh,
understood this. Mhm.
so is this the first session of mobile testing?
Yes.
Okay. Because there are like few words are new and like some other know about it. So that's why.
What are the new words? I
No, no, there are like many I cannot like tell now. But I'll go through it once, so maybe. Yeah.
maybe I use the words which we have used in in Selenium, which is already completed. I mean, one batch got completed Selenium. When I say client libraries and all, we covered this in Selenium, but I clearly explained over in this session as well, is what I believe when I'm explaining the architecture.
Yeah, yeah. Client library and all those things. Yeah, I'm also like I know. Yeah,
Mhm.
okay. Yes, sir. Got it.
Yeah,
Just wanted to know because
this
so
is the
many
first.
other. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Thanks.
So now we need to concentrate on this part. Okay, so that's the only leftover in terms of configuration. All right. So I was saying you, like, Appium is on top of Selenium, on top of an additional layer on top of Selenium. So we need Selenium client libraries. Sorry, pen is not working. So we need Selenium client libraries. Okay. So when I say we are gonna add jar files for the Selenium, along with that, we also need to have the client libraries for the Appium. Okay. So if you go back to appium.io, and if you go to the downloads, you would see the language bindings or the client libraries for different languages. As we are using Java, we will just go ahead and download the version of Java. Okay. These client libraries, you could, even when you're actually creating a project from scratch without using any build tools like Maven, you need to download these jar files, and we need to build these files into our project. Okay, by manually going to build path and adding our jar files, external jar files, and doing all the steps. And I hope you are familiar with that. And we will directly configure the Maven project. So in a gist, the whole things that are needed from the client side is, we need an IDE, which is like Eclipse kind of tool or IntelliJ. To that IDE, we need to create a Maven project, and inside the Maven project, we add two dependencies. First dependency is Selenium libraries, or the Selenium dependency, and the other one is Appium dependency. Okay, so these two dependencies needs to be added, so that the client, from the client side also, we will be good. And I hope it would be very simple for you. We will definitely do this at later point of time, but just giving you a gist of what it looks like from the client side, right? So that's pretty much about the client side. We will add dependencies for Appium and Selenium, and we also need an IDE. IDE could be Eclipse or whatever it is. And we also need some build tools like Maven, okay, to just auto build our application or the app or a project. Okay, so these are the things that are needed from the software standpoint. Okay, right. So now if someone could just give complete gist of tools that we discussed right now, what are all tools that are required to configure or to create this setup? Can someone come forward and give the names of different tools that we have used?
APM,
Right.
First one is APM server.
Mm-hmm.
Android Studio,
Mm-hmm.
Maven,
and IDE,
IDE.
Mm-hmm.
Selenium files, jar files, Selenium and APM
Mm-hmm. The Maven. We
and
are good,
Maven.
right? So these are the tools that we are actually, these are the tools that we have used so far. So you keep the architecture in mind, so that the tools automatically comes to your mind. Okay, that's why I actually integrated the architecture and the tools, and then I was trying to install them. Okay, Appium is the server. Appium is a server, and for emulator we need Android Studio, and inside that Android Studio we need to go to SDK manager to get the path of SDK, Android SDK, and device manager to create a device. Okay, and that's what we have done in Android Studio. What are the environment variables that we have set?
Path and Android Home.
Okay, so to path we have added three paths to the path
SDK
environment.
tools,
Yes, SDK
Platform
tools.
Platform
tools.
SDK
tools.
platform tools, and SDK tools bin.
Bin.
Okay,
Tools bin.
so SDK platform tools and SDK
Tools bin.
tools bin.
Bin.
So these are the paths that we have added to the environment variables. And what are the commands that we have used to get the list of AVDs and to launch an AVD?
Emulator LST AVDs.
Emulator list AVD
Later hyphen list,
hyphen list AVD
Hyphen AVD.
AVDs.
and to launch an
And
emulator,
emulator
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 hyphen
hyphen
AVD.
and
AVD in the
device
name.
name.
and the name of your
Device.
emulator.
Emulator.
So these are the things that we have discussed and which are very important to kickstart your journey with your Appium. And now the next thing is the next thing that we're going to study today is, I don't really sure if we get enough time for that or not, but
Uh,
identifying the elements is something that we will go ahead and
Yeah.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually Pratap sir just move some of their current batch to the this mobile testing, and right now even we are just done like a 2 3 class of like a testing, and we know the testing concept and all, but we not done started the Selenium. So for this mobile testing, we needed a Selenium also. So can you tell me how to which like a Selenium jar file I needed to install in my machine?
uh, Definitely you will understand the setup. Right now I was just giving the context for you,
Yeah,
and
true.
just to explain you, it's a dependency, and we all know
True.
how are you aware of Maven?
Yeah, we have a Maven dependency in our Eclipse because we done the advanced Java, so that's why we have.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
but
so you just need to go to Maven repository and get the
yeah,
dependency for the Selenium. But you would see me actually creating that setup as well once we actually started the automation. This is all about the introduction and understanding of the framework, and to just get a gist of what are the tools that we're going to use through this journey.
okay.
Okay,
Okay. So
so
right
nothing
now
much
you
more than that. Don't worry of any prerequisite knowledges except
okay,
Java and Maven. So we're going to cover every single setup, and I'll also explain you every single thing without expecting anything as a prerequisite again, except Java.
okay. Thank you.
Okay. uh, you will definitely get the dependencies from this Maven repository. That's a different thing. uh, but don't worry about that right now. We are going to do that setup anyways. And the first thing that I was talking to you is identifying the elements, right? Okay, so to identify the elements, uh, we actually need to go ahead and use some properties. When I say properties, if you open this particular app, if you open this particular app, so every button, this next button will have some properties in the sense, when if I'm a developer, if I'm developing this particular app and this particular page, I'll give some name to this button. Let's say forward slash button, and id is equal to next, uh, something of that sort. If I have to create that element, let's say a button id is equal to some name of that button, which is next button. and name of it. We call these as attributes and attribute values, which are unique identifiers for that particular element. The unique identifiers in the sense the name of that particular element. Like if I am a person, my name is Mohan, so I have a particular name that is used to identify me as a person, right? Similarly, for any element on a particular app, it will have its unique name that is used to identify that particular element. In this case, it could be ID, or it could be something else, or it could be anything. Okay, it depends on the developer who is developing it. But as an automation tester, your role is to identify the unique name or unique identifier for that particular element. Let's suppose I would say class is equal to some xyz and he's giving some random attributes and attribute values. Okay, so this is how the element looks like. Okay, this it's a button and it has different attributes and attribute values. The one which is to the l- left side of this equal to is called as attribute, and which is to the right side is called as an attribute value. Okay, so for this particular object, which is button, has three attributes and attribute values, or three pairs of attributes and attribute values. Out of these three values, it's not your concern as an automation tester what are the attributes and attribute values that are given. Okay, this would not be a bug from your side. So he gave some random values which is not standard, it's not something that you're going to report. Okay, it's the only purpose of exploring these attributes and attribute values as an automation tester is you're gonna use these identifiers to identify that particular element. In this case, out of these three, one could easily visualize what is the unique identifier of this button, which is like ID, right? I could just visualize these attributes and you could say this is the unique parameter that would easily identify that particular element, right? Which is ID next button. We're gonna use this particular attribute. This we call as an identifier. Similarly, for a particular mobile app, how to actually get the identifiers. Okay, how to get the identifiers of for this particular mobile app, or that's what we're gonna explore. So it's not something like in Selenium. What we basically will do is go to a particular website. We will do just right click, and here we will write the XPath. Okay, so that it actually identifies that particular element, and many of you knows about this, I'm pretty sure. So if I want to identify this, I just need to give that name. Okay, so when I give this name, it is identifying that particular element. So the unique identifier for this would be, you could use these attributes and attribute values, which is Appium client libraries. That is a unique name for this particular tag over here. Okay, that's the name of that particular object. It's as simple as this in Java, in if you are automating a browser. Okay, but when it comes to Appium, how do we achieve this is something that you have to understand, and it's not so tricky, but it is something which you need to understand. Okay, so the first important step is, again, let me open the paint now. Inspecting the elements would be similar to this. We are replacing the Appium client libraries with an inspector now, and everything looks the same. Okay, what I'm saying is, instead of everything looks same for us now, except the client libraries. Now we have an Android device and we do have an iOS device, and we have the server, which is a mediator between the client libraries and the devices, right? Now instead of client libraries, now we will get an inspector. Okay, this is an additional tool that is being provided by the Appium, and I call this as an Appium inspector. Okay, this is the tool that we're gonna use to identify or to get the attributes and attribute values for different objects on the mobile app. Okay, Appium inspector is something that we're gonna use to identify the elements. Okay, so we're gonna use Appium inspector to identify the elements. Now we replaced the client libraries with the Appium inspector is what I was saying to you, right? the communication remains the same. This APM inspector puts a request to the APM server. APM server communicates the same to device, gets the response, put it to the APM inspector. Okay. So this is a replica of the client libraries. We will not perform actions on it. We could also do perform actions, but minimal actions. You would see this setup lively right now. Okay. So what parameters that this inspector has to give to this server so that this server would be able to connect to the device. Okay. So this inspector which is over here, the inspector which is over here should give some details, some sort of details to the APM server inspector. Some sort of details would be the platform name. Okay, is one sort of detail. Like we already discussed this, we have to give the platform name so that this understands whether that is an Android device or iOS device. And also, if you have multiple devices, it's a good idea to give the device name as well. We need to give the device name and also the app that you want to connect to. Okay, and this is not actually mandatory. I'll say you why with the inspector, whereas with the real automation it is important. So with the inspector, what we do is we will actually bind both of them with along with the server. I'll show you how that basically happens. So the first important thing that that you need to understand is the communication remains the same, but the client libraries are being replaced by the APM inspector. APM inspector is a new tool that came into picture right now, and for this also you need some installations to be you need to get some installation done. Okay, in the earlier versions of APM, if I okay, the first question here is, when I have to inspect the elements, do I need to start the server or not?
Yes,
Yes.
Why?
Yes,
What's the
sir.
reason?
it is the one who will communicate with the
Right.
devices.
So everything would remain the same except uh, uh, except the client libraries are being replaced um, with the inspector.
Appium inspector.
Yes. Okay. So that's something which is important now. Now, how do we install this? Look, if you click on Start Server, in the earlier versions of APM, we used to have the inspector embedded within APM. So you could see inspector is moved as a different tool right now. But if you install the older versions of APM, I got the latest version, but if you install the old versions of the APM, you would see the inspector embedded within the APM. So earlier we used to have this option right now available with us. Okay, and now to get the inspector again, just go to the Google and get the inspector. APM inspector download. So it's coming over here. You'll get a GitHub link like this. Go to this particular link and scroll down. I'll paste this link because it would be something different. I'm giving this particular link in the chat window so that you could get this. All right. From here, you could get the relevant inspector downloaded, whether it is Windows, Mac, Linux. Again, you could get the inspector downloaded to your machine. Okay. So once the inspector is downloaded, okay, I'm again saying it's just an installable. Download the executable, double click that so that it actually gets the APM inspector installed to your machine. Now the next thing is, you just need to, once you install the APM inspector, it looks something like this. This is the APM inspector app that you will see once your installation got completed. Just try to open this app, click on open, so that this is a new app that gets opened for you. And this is how the outer structure looks like for the APM inspector. So here we are seeing different things. One is, what is the host, what is the port, and what is the remote path. Okay, so I was telling you, right? As an client library, what it has to do, it has to redirect all its requests to the port number on which the APM server is listening, right? It has
Yes.
to, the responsibility of this is to transfer all its requests to a particular port. So this is how we redirect those requests. We need to give the port number and the IP address over here, so that every request that is coming out of this inspector will be redirected to this port address and this IP address. Okay, so that's the reason why they gave two options over here to give different host numbers. If the APM server is listening on 4723 and if you're giving different port number over here in the APM inspector will redirect those requests to a port number which is given over here, which will not be understood by the APM server which is listening on 4723. So that's the reason why you have to give these parameters over here. Okay, and the second thing over here is desired capabilities. We already discussed the desired capabilities, right? What do we mean by desired capabilities?
Universal ID and
Yes,
device name.
right. So those are the device capability, I mean desired capabilities. So when I say desired capabilities, so what is the data that we are giving to the APM server so that it would be able to identify our device we want to connect? Okay, you could name it as key value pairs. The desired capabilities are key value pairs that we are providing as an input to the APM server, which are used to identify the device or app that we actually want to interact with. Okay, those are desired capabilities. Desired capabilities are key value pairs. Okay, how would they look like? And so on this particular inspector, there is a link attached for you. Okay, desired capabilities documentation. Okay, so if you click this documentation, you would see different kinds of options that are available for you. Okay, so these are like key value pairs that are available with us. Okay, just a second. Where were we? So I was telling you, right? So these are desired capabilities that are available with us. One is platform name. This is just an example. Platform name is iOS. What is the version of the platform? What is the device name? What is the automation name? Have you heard about XEUA test anywhere?
Yes, it's a iOS,
Yes.
a
Yes.
simulator.
Yes. For when it is iOS, you will go ahead and use XEUI test and the app path. Okay. Let's not bother much about these things, but just get an idea of what are desired capabilities. So, uh, does this actually gives a precise details to the APM server to identify a particular app on a particular device? Is the question that you have to ask yourself. If yes, then these details are sufficient to connect to a particular device. Are these details sufficient to uniquely identify your device? Yes or no, please.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I think.
It would be sufficient because we have the device name, we have the platform name, we have the app, we have the automation name, everything is there. And the second important thing that you have to understand is every capability name is in camel case. You know what is camel case, right? So it's every different
Yes.
word starts
No.
with a capital letter. Okay, the initial word starts with a small letter, and it keeps on I mean it continues all the way. Okay, so that's we call as camel casing. Every capability name would be in camel case. Automation name, platform version. So there would be bunch of capabilities that are available in this documentation. If you would like to explore, you could explore, but I haven't explored, and practically we won't actually use all these things in the real world. But I'm not sure when we get a need to use them. But Here is where everything that would be available for you, and most of the stuff could be achieved with capabilities as well. Just given sight on these different data that is available over here. Okay. uh, and I would like to walk you through few important stuffs over here. Automation name. Okay. Which automation engine to use is the description, and the details over here is UI automator to XEUA test. Okay. uh, were you able to sync this with the architecture that we have discussed?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Espresso UI Automator 1 could also be used for the Android, but those are like old versions of this automation test engine or automation test framework that is being provided by the automation developers altogether. Okay. So the latest is UI Automator 2, but we also do have versions called as Espresso UI Automator 2, Automator 1 available earlier. Okay. And platform name is nothing but iOS, Android, and Firefox OS. The device name, you know what is device name, and we know what is app is nothing but the path of your apk file. Okay. So the extension for the app files is .ipa for iOS and .apk for Android. We call them as apks, right? uh, So these are pretty few details. UDID, Universal Device ID. And we will also see few other stuffs like no reset, full reset when we are actually performing the automation. But right now we gonna use only few parameters to connect to the device. Now I got my emulator, which is my left side of my stuff is ready with me, right? I'll keep everything as is. So we got this emulator, which is the, oh god, why it's not moving, which is the right side of our architecture. And we have our Appium server, which is the mediator between the Appium server and the Android device. And here is the inspector, right? So inspector is what, which is trying to communicate to the mobile device from the left side. God. So this is how it looks like, right? So this Appium inspector puts a request to the server, and server puts a request to mobile device, gets the response, gives it back to the Appium inspector. So what details that I need to pass right now is I'll start with platform name. Okay. The platform name to connect to this device is, platform name is Android, right? I'll just copy this, go to inspector, give the name of the platform, and what is the value I am trying to connect to an Android device. Okay. So the value would be Android. I gave the details. Now I'm trying to start the session. Click on start. Let's see what happens. Something happened. Are you seeing something difference on the inspector? Hello.
Yes. What?
What's
The mobile app come to right side,
Yeah, we
left side.
got the app
Left
displayed
side.
on the mobile device, and you could see both are looking same.
Right. Yeah.
And now let me open the calendar here. I opened a calendar here and just click on this refresh button over here. Okay. I'm clicking a refresh button, and you could see the same got reflected on my emulator as well. Okay. This is not happening directly. This communication has been happening through the server only. You could see different logs over here added time to time. Okay. So these are different logs that have been added to the Appium server because the communication itself is being added, is being done through the server. Okay. So that's what you need to understand. So now we got everything in sync with the device. Now we established the connection from the inspector to the device. But one thing that you have to think over is, we just gave the platform name. Apart from that, we haven't passed automation name, we haven't passed device name, we passed literally nothing. But how it's able to connect to the device?
There's only one device connected, that
One
is
There is
mobile.
only
device.
one device.
Crazy, that's the right. We just have one device, and there is no actual hurdle for the APM server to filter out the devices. We just have one device, and it's an Android device. We just gave it's an Android device, just try to connect to that, and it just found out one, it connected to that. That's all. Got it. So that's the reason why it got connected. When we have multiple devices, then it is obviously necessary to pass out the exact details, to actually connect to that particular device. Okay. uh, the next thing is, uh, I want- okay, so now, the first important thing that I would like to tell you right now is, just try to explore different things. You have seen refresh button, right? And also we have this back button. Just click on back, so that it just took us to the back state, I mean the earlier state, where this mobile app is. Like, we clicked on, it's just like clicking on the back button. Just click on the back button, it is not getting refreshed over here. But here, for the mobile device to get reflected on this particular app, you just need to click on this refresh button, but not vice versa. So if uh, you know let me go to this phone button. It's not actually happens now. So I opened this contacts app, I refreshed this, and if I click on back button, it takes it performs the action on the real device, and the screen is getting refreshed. So when we are performing something on the mobile device, it's not getting automatically refreshed on this emulator. For that, you just need to click on refresh button. But when we perform action from the emulator, that has been actually been performed on the real device. Okay. That is something which you have to understand. And I'll just this is again I'll just wind off today's session with one thing. You could see something like APM settings over here in app. Okay, this is not something which we have installed, and this is not something which came up with the real device as well. When you created a fresh device, just take a look whether this particular app is there or not, which is like APM settings. Okay, this particular app will not be there when you freshly created a new device. This particular app will be installed only when you're trying to connect through the APM server. Okay, APM server will inject this particular settings app into the device to which you're trying to connect, and that's an automatic process. So don't wonder when you see something, a different app coming onto your device without your knowledge. This is something being done by the APM APM itself. Okay, and this is the hierarchy tree, which is like, if you compare this with um, your website. On your website, you will have a DOM structure of different parent and node elements. Similarly, on the APM as well, you will have different structures. Like, this is the parent of the whole page, and if you drill down, you would see the icons of different uh, apps as well. So this is the hierarchy of different things. Okay, we use this hierarchy, and we use different methods to find out the elements by just passing the parameters. Okay, and also you would see the leftmost side, I mean the rightmost side, these are the attributes and the attribute values. Okay, you could see attribute and its value. You could use these values to identify the elements. Okay, out of these elements, it also filters out what are the unique parameters or unique identifiers that you could use to identify that particular element. For this particular element camera, I have the accessibility ID as camera, XPath as this. You could use these identifiers to identify that particular camera, and you could perform some action on it. Okay, action could be anything like click on it or do something like that. And there are different options that are available over here. So here you could see tap is nothing but when you click on this, it clicks on that camera and the camera gets opened over here. Okay, that's pretty much what you have to understand from this. Okay, uh, tap is nothing but if you would like to perform some action on it, you could tap on it. I don't know why calculator is not there, but let me open phone. I'm just refreshing this and identify this particular element over here. So inside this, go to that particular I just want to click on this particular icon. Okay, so go here. So on this keypad, if I want to tap, I mean, the click is something which we use on desktop. Tap is something that we use on smartphones, right? Just a click or tap on it. When I click tap on it, it opened this particular um, keypad. So you could perform those actions from here. And do you know what do you mean by send keys?
Sending
Send,
parameters.
yeah, sending some text to it. Okay, where do you want to send the text? Let's suppose I want to enter something here. I think I'm not able to enter anything over here. Why it's so? Okay, let's come over here and try to do something over here. Okay, uh, that should be fine for today. Let's explore more about these options tomorrow. I don't want to make everything in a single day. Let's concentrate mostly on creating that setup and understanding the architecture, and we will discuss more about this inspecting the elements and different ways of inspecting the elements, and actually creating or doing that stuff or identifying these actions from the client code is something that we're going to explore in the next session. We will do some basic automation of a particular app, and from there we will mm, do more stuff on it. All right,
So,
let's catch up. Yep.
so,
Any
so I have a
questions?
question.
Hmm.
From the device manager, we were creating a virtual device, right? From
Yeah.
Appium.
Hmm.
So there you selected R, right?
Yeah, you could select. Yep, I selected R.
Uh, I was trying to do that, but I couldn't see R in the list.
You doesn't actually need to use only R. You could use whatever that is available.
Anything is fine. I
Yeah,
mean,
anything.
whatever we are using. Okay.
Yeah,
It depends on the what we are automating, I guess, right?
right. Yeah, I mean, it's just a version that you're installing onto your phone, and it's obvious to try different versions. That's the purpose of creating an emulator, where you will get a feasibility to test multiple softwares, multiple devices, and all.
Okay. So which one is? So which one would be so, so which one would be a good choice for this class? I mean, if I can't find R, so
The
what should I
only
choose?
constant I would say is choose 6.7 inches screen, so that you would not face so many challenges for scrolling and all the stuffs, at least to kickstart with. So make sure the
Okay.
screen size is big. The version of the Android is not a challenge.
Okay. 6.7. I see Pixel 6 Pro. That should be
Yeah,
fine, I guess,
go
right?
ahead with that. Yes,
Okay.
but I'm wondering why you're not seeing R. You should definitely see that. Is that the latest version? You just configured it now?
Yeah.
Not sure. You're using Windows or Mac?
Mac.
Okay, maybe.
There is something called resizable experimental. Is that R? No, right?
I don't think so. That's not R. That should be fine. You could go ahead with any version that is available. But as I told you, only screen size is a constant.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm.
Uh, so
So I'll take one more question, please.
that's, yeah, yes.
Yeah. So if I'm testing the same app on two different devices, then will I
Mhm.
be connecting those two different devices to different ports?
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
Um, if I'm testing the same app on two different devices,
Uh-huh.
so those two devices, will I be connecting the devices to different ports?
For different quits. Is
Ports,
that what?
ports. The port number, like the default is
Oh, yes,
470.
yes. Obviously, you have to connect to different ports.
Okay,
Um, when you are, no, you could make your, like server listening on a single port, redirect your request to the same port, but with different capabilities. Which is like this is called as parallel testing. Like you will run on different browsers, right? If you're talking about Selenium, you will run this on different browsers, right?
yes. Yeah, different browsers that I can understand, but I didn't understand the scenario when we will be using a different port. That scenario I didn't understand.
Huh. Different port you will use when it is occupied. When the port is occupied, you wouldn't be able to do it. I mean, you wouldn't be you reuse that port, right? If the port is already occupied, you cannot use it again, right? So
Okay,
in that case, you have to go ahead and use different port.
okay. So the when is the port occupied?
Port will be occupied when you are using it for any other issue or for any other things.
Okay, so if I'm running an app on an Android device, and like, can you give me a scenario? I'm not able to understand how,
Can
when
we
will it
continue
be?
this in the next session? I guess this meeting has to be used for some other session. I'll start explaining this port in the from the next session.
Sure, no
All right.
problem. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you.